Welcome. On this lesson, we're going to talk about the construction of a translation. Let's understand what we want to do. We're going to get this object, a line segment AB, and we're going to try to translate it using the vector DC. A vector, it's a line that has a direction and a length. In other words, we want to get the line segment AB and translate it using the length and direction of the vector DC. Let's start with point B. The first thing that we want to do, let's measure the length of the vector DC. Now that we have that length, let's move our metal leg to point B, and let's create a mark using the length of DC. Now the vector started at point D and it finished at point C. So let's measure the initial distance that the vector had to point B. So let's measure the distance from D to B. Now using the same distance, now let's go to point F, and let's look to the intersection from the previous mark. Let's clean this up a little bit. At this intersection that we have just found here, this is where we're going to find the image of B. Let's call it B prime. So given point B, if we move it using the vector DC, it's going to land at this very specific location, B prime. Now let's recreate the same process, but now for point A. Let's start by finding the measurement of the vector DC. So using this measurement, let's go to point A and let's create a mark. Now let's find the initial length that the vector had with point A. So let's move my metal leg to D and let me find the distance to A. This is how far point A initially was from vector DC. So now let's move my metal leg to the end of the vector and let's find the intersection with our previous mark. Now at this intersection that we have just found here, this is where we can find the image of A. So let's call it A prime. So now let's connect the image points. So this line segment that we have defined as A prime B prime can be seen as the image of AB after it was translated using the vector DC. Let's take a look at another example. So in this example, we are given a triangle ABC. We want to translate this triangle using vector DE. So notice that it starts at D and it's going towards the direction of point E. So let's start with point C. Let's start by finding the length of the vector DE. So now let's give this measurement to point C. Let's move my metal leg to point C without changing the distance. And now let's create a mark. Now vector DE, notice that is pointing to the left hand side. So that implies that we started at point D and then we move it towards point E. So let's find the initial distance from D to C. Now that we have that distance, let's move the metal leg to E. And let's look for the intersection. Therefore, we have found the image of C. Let's call it C prime. Now let's translate point B. Let's find the length of the vector DE. And now that we have that length, let's move my metal leg to B. And let's give that length to point B. Now that we know how far point B should move, let's find the initial distance from the vector to this point. Let's find the distance from D to B. Now that we know that initial distance, let's move my metal leg to E, and let's give that same distance to find an intersection. And at this intersection is where we're going to find the image of B. So let's call it B prime. So now let's translate point A. Let's measure the distance from vector DE. Now let's give that measurement to point A. Let's find the initial distance from the vector to A. And knowing this distance, let's move to point E. And let's look for that intersection. And at this intersection is where we're going to find the image of A. So let's call it A prime. Now let's define the triangle after the translation. And this is the triangle that we wanted to find. The image of ABC. Notice that all we did, we move every single point using the same length and same direction to define our image. Hello. If you would like to continue learning about mathematics, you can check out the videos on the left.